Hey guys, so if you've been following my work online for the past couple months, you'll know that I've been using a Fuji X100F alongside the film cameras that I use. And after posting images online, I've had a lot of people reach out just curious about my workflow when it comes to editing the files from the Fuji and how I'm getting this consistency between them and the images that I've shot on film. So today I want to do this quick video and just talk about that a little bit and just show you guys a bit of a behind the scenes when it comes to my process and the steps that I take when editing the Fuji files. So before we jump into it, I do want to just mention one thing, and that is when I first started working with the Fuji files, there was never this idea to try and recreate the look of film specifically, or to try and recreate the look of Portra 400. And I also never put them side by side with my film work to try to match them. I just really approached them the same way I would when I edit my film images, and that is to just get them to a point that looks good to my eyes and that I'm excited about. And I think that comes from building up a vision and a style with a certain project over a number of years. And I think it doesn't matter if you're shooting on film or digital or whatever, you'll get that image to a point you're happy with in a specific way after you've kind of developed that style over a period of time. So anyways, just want to mention that I am going to show you some side-by-sides of the same image shot both on digital and film that I did edit at completely different times, and you can just get a feel for how close they can look. But anyways, let's jump into it. So the first images we're going to look at is this pair here, and all of these images were shot on my recent trip out to Route 66 using the X100F, or the film stuff was on the Pentax 645N with Portra 400. So I was shooting duplicates at times just because it was my first time working with the Fuji. So I brought this pair up first just to show you the similarities and how I got there. So this first one here is the Fuji X100F, and I have cropped this to 4:3 to match the 645 aspect ratio. And this is the Pentax. And let's see if we can pull these up side by side here. So we're going to develop. There we go. Let's just close those. So yeah, Fuji on the left, Pentax on the right. And like I said, these were edited independently. I actually edited the Fuji image before I got my film scans back, and then I edited the film scan afterwards. So very, very close, but this kind of goes to show that whole point of just vision and style and building that up over a period of time. And it doesn't matter what you're shooting on, you'll kind of naturally work images to get to that point without really having to sit down and side-by-side things. But anyways, let's jump back out of that view. We're going to go just to the Fuji file. I'm going to develop, get back to this standard view, open this up. Okay, so this is the Fuji file after editing, and this is before. So there are a number of things that I'm doing, and it's, like I said, it's just happening naturally based on what I enjoy in terms of a palette for this type of work that I'm doing. And the theme with this work for me has been really playing off of these blues and these browns and these oranges and yellows in the desert. These nice contrasting or complementary colors. So for me, I'm always keeping that in mind when I'm approaching the digital work or with the film work as well in terms of building a look. But even still with this image, not that much was really done to it. But before we jump into specific edits, the one thing I will talk about quickly, because this is something that people have asked me about, with the Fuji cameras, they have a bunch of built-in film simulations. And I think it's a little confusing at times because they're all in camera, and they only save to JPEG files. So I actually thought at the start that if I was shooting RAW, I wasn't going to be able to have access to those film simulations. And then someone on Instagram actually let me know that they are built into Lightroom. So when you're in the develop module and you're working with a Fuji RAW file, if you go to profile here, you go beside it to this these four boxes, you click on that, and this brings up the profile browser, and they're gonna all be listed right here. These are the built-in Fuji ones. So you'll see there's Astia, Classic Chrome, Pro Neg, Velvia, Provia, Pro Neg Standard, and then there's the black and white simulations as well. So this is really really awesome because I really like the Fuji film simulations. I think they've done a really good job, and I like them as a starting point, specifically Classic Chrome when I'm working with daylight images, and I'll show you guys why. So let's back out of here for a second. So I'm going to change the profile to Adobe Standard. So the biggest differences here, and we'll do kind of a back and forth, obviously the reds, but look at the blues and the kind of yellows and browns. So let's go back to, you know what, I'll just undo. So that's Classic Chrome, that's Standard. That's Classic Chrome, that's Standard. Classic Chrome, Standard. So for me, we'll go back to the Classic Chrome. You'll see that the blues kind of take on a little bit of this cyan or this teal look. There's less magenta in them. So if we go back to the Standard and now back to the Classic Chrome. And then also the yellows or the browns, the oranges, desaturate, and they also take on a little bit of that cyan. So Classic Chrome really is kind of desaturated to begin with compared to the other profiles. So sometimes you are adding saturation, but for any of the daylight work that I'm doing, I really like using that as a kind of a starting point, because for all of the film work that I'm doing and the look that I've built up with this portfolio over the past couple of years, that is really the basis of it, is pulling magenta out of the skies, having a little bit of this more cyan or teal look to the skies, and then also having these really kind of light yellows and browns. And that is one of the characteristics of portrait, and that's why I like using it so much. So Classic Chrome is a really nice base for me to start with. And you'll see if we go into here and we try one of the other ones instead, like if we go to pick Provia, you'll see that it brings a lot of saturation. Then the blues in the sky also lose some of that cyan. So Classic Chrome for me is my go-to for all of my daylight stuff for this body of work. And then after that, very similar, if you watched my video about editing film scans, you'll know that a lot of the times I'm raising the exposure a little bit, I'm opening the shadows way up, pulling the highlights down a little bit, but I'm keeping things really bright, and almost, you know, the midtones are kind of boosted way up. So if we pull the shadows down, you'll see the difference. That's where they are. Highlights are just pulled down a little bit here. I've warmed the image up substantially, so this was probably shot on a daylight white balance. I have it up around 7,300 Kelvin, so it's warmed up quite a bit. Magenta's pulled down a little bit, almost at around 0. And then it looks like for this image, that's really all I've done. For some of the others, you'll see I do dig into the Hsl sliders a bit, but the last thing that I usually do with these, if we go to 1:1, is I use Lightroom's built-in grain simulation here. So we'll turn it off. So that is without, and it's really just super clean without that grain added. And for me, it's definitely a must. I usually have it somewhere around 28 to 35, but it's all personal preference, just whatever looks best to your eye. But I like using this because it just kind of takes the edge off that digital look a little bit, and it's all these little things that add up to kind of help with this filmic look, or whatever you want to call it. For me, it's just a matter of matching my work consistently regardless of what it's shot on. So yeah, there's before, there's after. Really simple though. So Classic Chrome, and then I'm just playing with the exposure a little bit, warming the images up a little bit, and then adding some grain. And then here is, so this is the one that's shot on film, and this is the edited version, and that's the before. So you'll see that very similar, shadows up, highlights down, warming it up, pulling out some magenta, and that's really it for this one. So the edits that I do for my digital work and for my film work are similar, are absolutely similar. And then the interesting thing with the Fuji files is, you know, some of them I am doing quite a bit of editing to, but then there's others where the work that I do on them is super limited. And I find this all comes down to time of day and the type of light and stuff like that. But we'll jump to one more image here from the Fuji. And this is another daylight image, so we'll go through this one a little bit. This has a few more edits than the last one. So this is after, and this is before. So you'll notice this trend that's happening. That's after. So we're on Classic Chrome again for our profile. If we go back to Adobe Standard, this is how it would have come in. So you'll see you lose a little bit of that kind of teal in the sky. Everything's a little more magenta, a little bit more saturation. And then same thing, I would have warmed this up. My shadows are way up, so they would have been like that originally. Again, I like to have these kind of rich blacks right kind of at the bottom part of the curve, and then I like to have my midtones and my shadows opened up for the look that I'm going for here. My whites are pulled down a little bit, although in this one they are clipping, but I'm okay with that. And then no work on the Hsl sliders here. Sometimes I will dig into them. Some of the later work I'm going to show you I will. And then same thing here, some grain added once again. So there's a good chance that with this image I just copy and pasted from this previous one here that we were looking at before and then made a few tweaks. But again, fairly straightforward. Classic Chrome is my starting point, warming the image up, brightening it up, opening up the shadows, adding some grain. And like I said, this is just an approach that happened naturally as I dug into these files and started working with them. Okay, so let's jump to this next one. So this one is shot at twilight. This was right before sunrise. So I find that for a lot of these twilight shots, I've actually been going with Provia as my go-to, and with a little bit of tweaking because it is too saturated for me. But you know, at this time of day, with this really kind of soft blue hour light, Classic Chrome was almost desaturating things too much. I really like how it works when it's full sun out, but you'll see if we use it in a situation like this, everything's almost too desaturated and you lose that kind of subtle glow that's there during twilight. And at least for me, I like to keep that there. There's kind of this fine line between it being too much and oversaturated or working, but Provia has been my go-to for that. And if we go back, we'll compare it with Adobe Standard. So the best way I can describe it is everything's almost just a little more rich, the colors themselves. But you'll see I've pulled my saturation down here to about -11. So that's a Provia, and that's Adobe Standard. And the Adobe Standard just seems a little flat to me. With Provia, things are just a little more rich, and I do really like it. So when it comes to adjustments for this image, this is obviously the final point I got to, but you'll see that the before really isn't that much different at all. So this would have been out of camera. We're still in the Provia standard profile, but it's a really nice look even before the adjustments. So again, I'm just tweaking it a little bit, opening up the shadows, pulling the highlights down a little bit, and then probably just some grain again. Yeah, so simple. So Provia standard I really like. Again, just a little bit heavy on the saturation for me, but for these kind of blue hour twilight images, I find it is really rich and nice. So this next image, similar. Again, this was on the X100V instead of the X100F, but this is the after, and that's the before. So again, like minimal difference and just a really nice look at a camera. So we're on Provia right now. This is the before. Again, a little oversaturated for me and for what I prefer. So my tweaks for this image were just pulling out saturation, you know, down to -20. My blacks I pulled down a little bit, and the highlights as well, and then some grain. But that's it. So like I said, the daylight work that I'm doing requires a little more editing to get it to a point to kind of fit in with this look that I'm going for. But I find that when I'm using these cameras in these twilight scenarios or this soft light, they're really requiring minimal editing of the files to get to the point that I'm happy with. So really cool. And then there's one last one here. This will be a very similar thing. This is the X100V again. You'll see I'm on Provia. Exposure's up a little bit, shadows, whites, and then saturation's pulled down. This one was a little underexposed when I shot it, So probably most of the adjustments here were just bringing the exposure up and then pulling saturation out. But just a look that I really enjoy. And again, we'll jump to Adobe Standard here so you can see the difference. So that's Adobe Standard and that is Provia. And I really like the look. Like I said, I find the colors, even though you have to pull them back, or I do for what I'm going for, they still kind of have this richness that isn't, that doesn't seem fake and kind of overdone. So I really enjoy that. Okay, so let's go back to another daylight image, and this is one that has a few extra adjustments done to it than the other ones we were looking at, and this is sometimes once I do kind of the standard adjustments, I'll have to dig into the Hsl sliders just to tweak a few things to get the image to where I want it to be. But you'll see again, classic chrome for all my daylight stuff. We'll take a look at Adobe Standard to see the difference. So there is quite a difference in look. Classic chrome, standard. So chrome is my go-to. Didn't really warm this one up too much. The shadows are opened way up. We should actually, let's look at a before. So that's a before on this one. And that's after. Before, after. So it did change quite a bit. Although that being said, the original image is underexposed, maybe just a little bit. It's almost just exposed for the highlights. So what I did is open the shadows way up, pulled the highlights down just a little bit. The exposure went up, saturation down a bit. Use classic chrome. So for the Hsl sliders, I did dig into them here, and depending on the image, I will use them from time to time, mainly to deal with the sky. So sometimes, depending on the time of day and direction I was pointing, the skies will end up being really dark and really kind of saturated, which is the opposite of the look I'm going for. So the first thing I'll do is dig into this luminance adjustment, and I'll usually bring both the aqua and the blue right up just to bring some brightness into that sky. And then on this one, I didn't touch the saturation. Sometimes I will pull saturation out of those, the aqua and the blue, but in this one, it looks like I bumped up the saturation in the orange and the yellow a little bit, probably because classic chrome, like I said, desaturates a bit. So this area of the picture was looking a little bit too desaturated for my likings. But if we turn this whole Hsl panel off, you'll see that's where we were, and this is with it on. So just bringing some brightness to that sky and then adding a little bit of saturation to this, this kind of grass in the foreground here. So again, very similar adjustments here for the main part, and then just digging into this Hsl panel, always depending on, again, which way I was facing and what the sky ends up being like. Okay, so now we're going to jump again to later in the day. Like I said, I'm finding that anything that isn't midday with this bright sun requires quite a lot less, I guess, drastic editing. I'm still doing quite a few adjustments for this one, but we're on classic chrome again. Let's look at a before, and that's an after. So before, after. So very similar to the other twilight photos that I showed you, or kind of end of day photos. The before and afters are a lot less drastic compared to these middle of the day ones. So for this one, classic chrome, pulling the highlights down, shadows up, standard stuff that I kind of keep reiterating I do with a lot of my images. But I did dig into the Hsl panel here. So if we turn it off, that's where we're at. And this is where we're at with it on. And what it looks like here is, again, sometimes with the classic chrome profile, it's a little too desaturated for me. So when I shot this image, it was just this incredible moment of light where I had these stormy skies behind me, and then the sun kind of poked out of the clouds at the last minute, and it just lit everything really warm. So not that I'm looking for this to be this dramatic, super saturated image, but when I first applied the classic chrome profile, as you can see, it is pretty desaturated, and it did just lose some of that feeling. So I dug into the orange and yellow here and up those, and then it looks like I pulled just a little bit out of the blue, and that's really it. So that's after the adjustments, and that's before. So most of the time with this panel and the Fuji files, I'm either increasing the brightness of my skies and desaturating them, or I am just adjusting saturation locally a little bit to correct for some of this desaturation that Classic Chrome profile ended up having on my image. Okay, so the last ones we're going to look at is I have these two last comparisons. Again, these were files that were edited at a separate time because I didn't have my film scans back yet, but when I was compiling images for this video, it was kind of neat to see the similarities and how close they ended up being naturally. Okay, so this first one is the Fuji file. This file is out of focus. So it's actually an image that I wouldn't use, but regardless, it's going to be fine for this demonstration just because we want to see the comparisons between the two. So this is Fuji, and that's Pentax. So obviously these aren't identical by any means. Film still has certain characteristics that I really enjoy, but in terms of color and look, considering I didn't sit these side by side and try to match them, they are very close, and I wouldn't hesitate to put, mix these images in a body of work because they have this consistency between them. So that's a Pentax, and this is the Fuji. And if we jump, let's go into the develop module with the Fuji image. And you'll see that that's the before. That's the after. So again, this midday shot, Classic Chrome warming it way up at 7300, highlights down, shadows opened a bit, brightness up, and then it looks like I did a little bit of luminance adjustments on the aqua and the blue channel just to help lighten them a little bit. And then here's the image from the Pentax, and this is the before, and that's the after. So again, if we look up here, very similar, adding warmth, adding brightness, opening the shadows, pulling down the highlights. Again, if you haven't seen my editing film scans video and you go and watch that, you'll kind of see this theme throughout all of the work that I'm doing for this portfolio. Okay, so last two images. So this one is Fuji, and this one is Pentax. And let's we'll pull these up side by side, just like that. So again, not identical, but pretty close considering I didn't edit these at the same time. So just interesting to see. And if for some reason you did want to match these images, I think you could get them even closer for sure, just with some tint adjustments and stuff like that. But let's go back to just the standard view, and we'll go to the Fuji file. So that's the after, and that's the before. It's kind of getting repetitive because my approach with all these midday images is the same. This one I probably pulled a little bit too much magenta out. Looking at it now, I'd probably add a little bit more in. But I did warm it right up, shadows up, pulled some saturation out of the aqua and the blue, added some into the orange and the yellows, and then lifted the luminance on the aqua and the blue channels. So we'll pull that HSL off, and that's with the HSL adjustments on. So again, depending on the image and the direction and how dark the skies are and stuff like that, this HSL panel can have quite a big effect on getting these images to the point where I'm happy with them. But then as you'll see with this first image, I didn't touch the HSL panel at all. So it really just all depends. It's different for everyone. And this is the Fuji image. That's the before, that's the after. I'd probably edit this one just a little bit more, but I'd probably pull these blacks down and then open the shadows up even more. Maybe a little less saturation, but very close between the two of them. So interesting to look at those images, and there's definitely this theme running through them. And it doesn't really matter if it's film or if it's digital. I'm really approaching the images in the same way, as you can see with the adjustments that I do. And with the Fuji work, my mindset isn't, okay, what should I do to this to make it look like film? My mindset is, what do I like and what I don't like. So I want the image to be warmer. I don't want as much magenta. The sky's too dark. All of these things are the exact same things that I'm thinking when I'm working with the film scans that I get back. So I guess the last question probably is, why would I work with film still if I can get the Fuji images to look so close to the Pentax? And for me, working with film is really a lot more than just the final image that I get. It's the whole entire process, and it's something that I really enjoy. The cameras, the film selections, getting film developed, the point of waiting for your work after a big trip. And that's really what it all comes down to, is just doing things the way that you enjoy most. So am I going to get rid of my film camera? Definitely not. It's still going to be my main choice moving forward. But with that being said, I'm definitely going to keep the Fuji, and I'm really excited about it. And let's be honest, at times it's definitely more convenient with it being digital. So I'm excited to work with both moving forward. Anyways, I hope this helps give you a little bit of a behind the scenes for anyone who's curious about how I work with the Fuji files. If you have any more questions, definitely hit me up. And if you aren't following me on Instagram, that's where I post all of my recent work pretty consistently. So check it out. My link is in the description below. As always, thank you guys. We'll see you soon.